Welcome back. I have to go out of town this weekend for a family function, and whenever I do something like that, like most of you, I want to be able to really focus on the people who are there and pay attention to them. And so it's always best to go without a lot of things hanging over my head. But it's fairly close to the beginning of the semester here. I've been running behind on a lot of things. And so while I'm staying up late at night and trying to get to sleep, and the mind is just churning of all the things that I need to do, it can create a sense of panic. And like some of you who have expressed on forums, that's not a great place to be. So what do? How do I deal with this scenario? Well, for me, I pull out my little black notebook, which I keep with me, and I start to make a list. I start to write down all of the things that I need to do over the next couple of days so that I can leave with a sense of clarity. And after writing all those things down, then I start to prioritize what has to be done, what might be pushed off till later. Is there an order? Is there a sequence that has to occur in order for me to achieve everything that I need to achieve? Once I've done that, I start to feel a lot calmer. It's easier to get to sleep. It's easier to wake up in the morning and think, okay, I know exactly what it is that I need to do today. And while very often things take longer or shorter than I think they will, I have a sense of direction, I have a sense of purpose. Why do I tell you that story? A couple of reasons. First, this week we're going to be focusing on how do we present a lesson. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is telling stories, using experiences from our lives, from real-world examples, from case studies, etc., because of the way that stories help concepts settle in for students. Two, I tell that story because part of developing a lesson is to think about how we organize, how we prioritize what it is that we present, and how we end up deciding what is or isn't important to include within a lesson. So with that prelude, let me turn back and review Module 3 as we prepare for Module 4. In Module 3, we are focusing on two main things. The first is how do we build rapport with our students and establish a contract for the class in which students can really feel engaged with us, with the material, with their fellow students, where they know what's expected of them and they know what they can expect of us. Because we know that when that happens, students are more likely to feel motivated, they're more likely to feel really enthusiastic about the material and the learning process, they're more likely to succeed. And second, we were thinking about the universal design for learning. How do we create an open and welcoming classroom? And how do we do that by providing multiple means of examining and delivering the material that we're presenting? Thinking about different ways that students can demonstrate their mastery of it, and considering different forms of engagement with students. Now, we do this in part because some of our students have very particular needs, but we also do it because by mixing those things up, it actually helps all of our students engage in a more thorough and thoughtful way the material, the skills, the knowledge that we want them to master. So that's really what we're up to in Module 3. And now that we've thought about how do we set the stage, how do we create the environment that we want in the classroom, we're going to turn in Module 4 to how do we present lessons. What do we do on a day-to-day basis? How do we structure those lessons? How How do we figure out how they're scaffolding the progression of our students? The first thing that we're engaging in Module 4 is lesson planning. And to really get into lesson planning, we're going to introduce an idea that will be very familiar to some of you, but maybe new to many of you. And that's the idea of backwards design. What we mean by backwards design is that when we're thinking about how we present a lesson, but this goes for syllabi, this goes for assignment design, many other things, we start by thinking about what we want our students to achieve. What's the learning outcome that we're after? Once we figure out what we want our students to achieve, what we want them to master, then we think about what will be the ways in which they can demonstrate that mastery. What's an assignment? What's an exam? What's a demonstration that will accurately reflect whether they have or haven't mastered those ideas, those skills, those processes that we want them to master? And then once we have that, we can start to think about what are the steps necessary in terms of scaffolded assignments or lectures or demonstrations or activities that will help students to reach that assessment and demonstrate their mastery. So it's backwards because we start with the end result that we want and then reverse engineer from there how we get there. So after thinking about backwards design, and we'll keep coming back to this, we also want to think about lesson structures. How do we organize a lesson so that it helps students move from where they are to where we want them to be? And we're going to talk about a couple of different forms of organization. The first one we're going to talk about is small teaching. And the idea of small teaching is to break up lessons into basically 4 parts. First, what do we do before the lesson itself actually begins? This could be in terms of homework, in preparations for the day. This could be in terms of what happens when students are entering a classroom or entering a virtual classroom of some sort. What are we doing at that moment to set the stage for what it is that we'll be doing in the class? Second, how do we introduce the material? What are we doing in those initial moments of the lesson to build curiosity, to help our students focus on particular issues or dynamics that will be important that day in class? How do we preview for them and set a structure that will help them to navigate the lesson as a whole? Then we have the body of the lesson itself, made up of those activities that we have chosen, those, whether it's lectures or interactive activities or case studies or group work, whatever it is. What are we doing in the body of the class? And then finally, what do we do in the final moments of the lesson? How are we helping, going back to our thinking about memory and what helps to solidify memory, what are we doing in those final moments to help students gather together the ideas of the lesson and solidify them in their minds? Are we having them do a quick writing assignment? Are we having them ask key questions to clarify what's gone on? Are we asking them questions that help them apply it in some way? But what are we doing at the end? So what do we do before class begins? How are we introducing material? What happens in the body of a lesson? And what do we do at the very end to bring the pieces together? That's small teaching. We're also going to be thinking about storytelling. Stories have a way of sticking in our students' minds, in our own minds, in a way that most other forms of presentation don't. So while we don't want to imagine that it's always the case that a story is the best way of presenting material, we do want to think about the structure of stories, how they work, and how they, because they're concrete, how they may help our students understand and master the material that we're presenting. Of course, there are drawbacks to stories. If stories go off on tangents that students are not going to see as relevant, that's going to be a problem. But how do we use that just human connection that makes stories lively for us to help our students think through and master what we're teaching? So those are the big parts of Module 4. We are thinking about backwards design, we're thinking about small teaching, storytelling, and other forms of lesson organization. To help us think through these things, there will be 2 major assignments. Some of you will be happy to know that there's nothing due Saturday night. There's no peer review this week. So you can move through your weekend without anxiety. Besides the response exercises, there are 2 main assignments. The first is to watch a micro-teach. You'll have 3 options. Choose the one that is most similar to your discipline. For some of you, there might be a couple that could fit, and it really doesn't matter. The idea is that you're watching one of the micro-teaches and thinking about it carefully. So the assignment is to evaluate it in terms of presentation, in terms of lesson design and organization, so that you have a chance to think through what works, what you would borrow from that teaching method, what you think could be improved upon and you'll try to improve upon in your own teaching, what questions you have about the way that particular instructor went about presenting material. The second assignment is the second of your micro-teaches. I know from these videos that many of us are a little bit uncomfortable on film, taking videos of ourselves. I face that every week. But it is an important exercise that helps us to see how we're coming across to our students. So unlike last week, in which you were really presenting the overview of the course, this week is focused on content. Here's a 10-minute lesson, something that you would be teaching, something that is in your discipline, in your field, a specific idea or skill that you're trying to teach students. And the goal here is to use the concepts of backwards design, small teaching or storytelling, to present that material in 10 minutes. As with the micro-teach from last week, for many of you it will not be possible or desirable because of university policies or the like to film in front of actual students. And that's okay. You can do this at home, you can do this in your office, you can do it in an empty classroom. And it's also okay to gather around friends and colleagues, etc., if you want to use them as substitute students to get that energy and dynamic that we often have with the classroom. But the goal is for you to test out these ideas of backwards design, small teaching, or storytelling, or a mix of all of them, in order to present the material that you've chosen. Those are the 2 assignments for this time around. I look forward to our discussions about how we design lessons. We're really getting into some of the very practical techniques, practical ideas that we can all be thinking about and improving upon, regardless of whether we're new to teaching or we're old hats that have done it for a long time. So I look forward to talking to you about that. Have a great week. I'll see you on the forums and be back with you next week.